During the holiday season, one specific type of machinery seems to enjoy a reverence practically unrivaled by any of its more contemporary equivalents. And no, I'm not talking about the checkout at the department store. I'm talking steam trains. Between decorations, Santa specials, and a certain film, there's just something about these lumbering giants which seems to tie them to December festivities. Why is that? Well, the answer is both layered and remarkably simple. Think about it, boil it down to its barest essentials. What is it you do when you board a train? You travel. The railways brought with them the convenience of not having to live close to your place of employment. Trams, buses, and indeed trains gave this whole commuting thing some viability. This shrinking of the world, if you will, made it so you could have breakfast in the capital and be in the farthest backwater of the nation by supper. And indeed, railways also made it easier to move out of your folks and move somewhere else. So much so that the railways even offered a furniture removal service, loading your stuff onto a container and setting it on its way where you are moving to. In fact, in 2024, a London and North Eastern Railway furniture container was dug up in Antwerpen. With families spreading thinner across the globe, and in a time where calling one's mother wasn't just a thing you put on the back burner because, oh god, I still have to do that after work, railways were a metaphysical way of connecting you to your family. So the most basic layer of association is a simple matter of, come the holidays, this train gets me from where I live to mother's pudding. That was not a euphemism, stop it. But of course, when a lot of people moved away from their families and a lot of people want to visit their families for the holidays, I bet you can see a problem forming here. The trains get crowded. And so, what within Europe at least, trains often suffer delays due to overcrowding and icy conditions. This is also why the concept of the last train home is such a romanticised concept. Against all odds, you've made it home. This whole icy conditions thing, by the way, is really funny when you look at the statistics. Ice, yes, rain, undoubtedly, but when you ask someone hailing from the Northern Hemisphere what the typical Christmas/holiday weather is, they are likely to answer snowy. This is funny because between the arbitrary dates of 1960 and 2025, the UK has only had 4 nationwide white Christmases. 4 is not a lot. But in 1812 to 1820, there were 8 nationwide white Christmases in a row. This is important to British culture, indeed to the whole of Western Euro culture as a whole, because those vital 8 years were the first 8 years in the life of a young Charles Dickens. Dickens grew up in the Little Ice Age, the coldest period for the North Atlantic region since the 1600s. The Decembers of his youth would have been bitterly cold indeed, so whenever he wrote about Christmas, he always described it as white. Believe it or not, but a lot of the modern idea of Christmas comes from Dickens's writing. Even in Chuck Dickens's day, it wouldn't have taken long to realise that December was the busiest month when it comes to traffic, so train travel was and is simply a part of the season. This also goes to those who did not intend to physically visit family. The railway was a symbol of connection. Railway stations were, once upon a time, an important link in the chain in the conveying of mail too. Meaning that you can thank the railways for sending your favourite niece a new bike or getting only the finest of Victorian horrors to your doormat. These children have definitely just bodied the body, by the way. They've got the look. Speaking of gifts, the Christmas train set. What's that about? While not always a staple of the season, like for instance before there were any trains, nowadays it is seen as a classic. The first mass-produced train sets came, of course, from Germany, made by a company which many still hold near and dear to this very day, Märklin, in 1891. But these were not simple toys for people like you and me. They were top-line products, while the commoners, the oiks, were not allowed anywhere near them. Or more likely, a pay grade nowhere near being able to afford it for your child, but secretly will be played with more by you. But, as is the course, comrade, cheaper imitators came along and actually made the model train, mostly clockwork by then mind you, for the masses. With the concept of the 13th salary becoming more and more widespread in the 1900s, this left extra income to buy such a coveted toy for wee Johnny, or indeed Jilly. And may I remind you that for most of the 1900s, Europe still rode behind steam, or in front sometimes. So these models were then not seen as nostalgic yet, they were just as much of a representation of what you would see in the day-to-day. Most children were more familiar with their local railway than they were with automotive vehicles. But children have this nasty habit of growing up, so as they did, they would eventually see steam being phased out. And those few years in modern history became the tipping point where steam trains were no longer seen daily and were thus relegated to those rose-tinted memories of the machines, along with the toys that they had inspired. Not so much because those memories were of a better time, but because of a simpler time, with fewer worries and responsibilities. I love me a steam train, don't get me wrong, but calling them efficient would be a bridge too far. Memories of the Christmas train set go hand in hand with the people present at that event, people you more often than not loved, who sadly will not be there with you forever. In November 1985, the natural conclusion to viewing steam trains as nostalgic took place. Author Chris from Alsberg, who also wrote Jumanji, released a wee book called The Polar Express. As a child, Alsberg played on a steam locomotive displayed at the Michigan State University. An N1 locomotive, its number was 1225. But Alsberg interpreted the number as 1225 Christmas Day, so he had always associated the locomotive as a symbol for the holiday. Like many authors, he decided to make that everyone else's problem, and he did a very good job at it. The Polar Express was awarded a medal, and only 4 years later had sold 1 million copies. Much like Dickens before him, what happens when an author is successful by writing about their own nostalgia in children's books is that it becomes other people's nostalgia, harping back to that simpler times point from earlier, as they recall being read the book when they were a child. I have no doubt in my mind, however, that most people watching are far more familiar with the 2004 film based on the same property. And so we reach the rather circular conclusion of the whole matter. Much like how Flying Scotsman is famous simply because it is, steam trains are a part of the holidays because they simply are. But maybe you ought not to just take my word for it. I turned to a friend of the channel, Anthony Dawson, whose knowledge of just how deep the connection between trains and Christmas truly goes gets the idea across far better than I ever could. When I posed him the question, where does the connection lie between holidays and steam trains, the historian kindly got back to me with the following. Quote, "The modern concept of Christmas, at least in the UK and the USA, is a Victorian creation, of writers like Charles Dickens or Harriet Martineau. But it is also a product of the railways. People had always tried to travel to see family at Christmas, but with the invention of the mainline passenger railway, this made it quicker and easier. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which opened in September 1830, was the first to offer rail travel 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And this presented it with many new problems, such as weather and sheer number of people wanting to travel. Problems which hadn't really gone away in nearly 200 years. At that first mainline Christmas in 1830, trains were running as much as 5 hours late because of snow, poor visibility, and because the Planet-class locomotive consistently lost their feet on icy rails. As soon as the wheels tried to grip, quote, considerable difficulty was experienced. It was found that the wheels of the engine, instead of moving forward, slipped on the rails, and moved around without making any progress, causing considerable damage to the machinery." End quote. Given that locomotives didn't have cabs, the crew must have been freezing. So too the guards sat on the roof at either end of the train. Nor were the carriages heated, and for second-class passengers, they didn't have any windows. But this didn't deter huge numbers of people wanting to travel by train, not just in the lead-up to Christmas, but on Christmas Day itself. In 1841, trains of the Liverpool and Manchester were so crowded that trains to Manchester were running over an hour late, and in the evening, trains to Liverpool were later still. It was even reported that, such was the rush of passengers, that the carriages were overcrowded and at one of the intermediate stations, around 100 were left behind. By the mid-1840s, newspapers were reporting the familiar litany experienced by all Christmas travellers: late trains, overcrowded trains, and cancelled trains. Given that the mainline railway was only 15 years old, it had rapidly transformed how people travelled and had transformed Christmas. One newspaper reported that trains on Christmas Day were usually busier than normal, and tickets for these trains quickly sold out. The Manchester and Leeds Railway, in running its Christmas Day trains, decided it would only make first-class tickets available, a sort of rationing, in order to keep numbers down. But in practice, such was the desire to see family at Christmas thanks to the new technology, trains were still far busier than usual. At least in 2025, even though their trains may be overloaded, or late, passengers tend to be able to sit down, in carriages with roofs and windows, heating and even access to a lavatory, something those hardy pioneer Victorian Christmas travellers could only dream of." End quote. So indeed, the Christmas rush is not only a worldwide phenomenon, but a timeless one as well, going back as far as the birth of the modern railway. The admiration for the machines, then in their infancy, once they got our weary travellers home in conditions not unlike those Charles D. wrote about, must have carried over into those tales of the glorious Christmases long, long ago. That being said, Christmas is a global holiday, not just one celebrated in the Eurosphere. So I wondered, does that holiday association with steam trains still ring true for those, for instance, in the warmer climate south of the equator? Well, what is a boy to do but reach out to another friend of the channel to get a first-hand account?
When I think of Christmas and trains, I feel like that's a very European thing, right? You see, here in South Africa, our Christmases are very different. While they're marketed to us as something with loads of lights and snow and all the European influence that you might expect with Christmas, the reality is completely different. You see, in South Africa, our Christmases are spent by the poolside, drinking beer and braaiing, or barbecuing for those of you who don't know what a braai is. But there really isn't that much of a connection between Christmas and trains here in South Africa. While South Africa does have an absolutely fantastic history of railways, the connection, I feel like, has been severed. However, in more recent years, it's been great to see a number of preservation societies band together and build up Christmas specials of trains. We have a number of railways here in South Africa that run throughout the December period, pulling Christmas and Santa specials, a link in some way to that European connection. We have some of the finest locomotives in the world, in my humble opinion, down here in South Africa, most of them North British built, with the likes of 19Ds, 15Fs and 15CAs pulling excursion trains all over the country during the festive period. And while sadly the world of model railways is a slightly different story because frankly it barely exists in this country these days, the old adage of receiving a train set under the Christmas tree I think still does apply to some families. Perhaps not as many as you would find though in Europe these days.
Thank you, Hilton. It is good to hear that Steam fans across the globe can get their fix come December. You love to see the passion for Steam really forming this global idea of the Christmas special, even if the setting is vastly different to the romanticised Dickens version of the holiday. Perhaps we need to hear one more perspective. One from an enthusiast, volunteer for Christmas specials, and from someone who might have helped shape UK train YouTube as we know it.
Hey everybody, Chris Eden Green here. Christmas has often been a very hit and miss time of year for me. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, but sometimes it can be joyous. And some of that joy stems really with the association with railways. I remember when I was about 4, maybe 5 years old, I got my first proper train set for Christmas. And obviously my family would take me on Santa specials on the Bluebell or the Kent and East Sussex. And every year, Christmas would usually be associated with something train related, whether it was going to a Santa Special on a railway or receiving model railway bits as Christmas presents. It was always something to look forward to in that regard. Then as I got older and I joined the Bluebell Railway as a volunteer, my friend Donald and I would help out on the Santa Specials on the trains. And it was usually very front of house stuff, welcoming passengers, serving mince pies and other refreshments and things like that. And it was always nice to see people enjoying themselves. It can be very stressful working on Santa Specials because you've got to make sure that everyone who's booked finds their designated seat and, is comfortable and, is just welcomed on board before you set off. And yes, it could be stressful, particularly when adverse weather adds to, the challenge of making sure everyone turns up and trains leave on time and so on. But seeing people's faces when they're having a lovely time, when they're enjoying themselves, when they're immersing the atmosphere of being on board a steam train at Christmas, it's just so satisfying and it adds to the escapism that a heritage railway can bring. I've always believed that a good steam railway experience is one where you can just sit down, forget about your troubles, forget about the outside world. You can just switch off from the day in, day out grind of today's reality, and the train just takes you away on that journey. You get to enjoy the countryside. It's gentle, it's peaceful. You can view it all at your own pace, in your own comfort, in your own compartment, and it feels like you're in another world. And when it's done right, when it's not too over-commercialised and not too in-your-face, a good Christmas can be like that too. Just forget about all your troubles of the daily grind and just switch off for a day. Be in another world. And some of that escapism has transferred over into my work. Every year since 2014, I've tried to bring a new DVD out every year for people to collect and enjoy. Okay, there may be more exciting things for people to look forward to, but having something under the tree, something for people to look forward to, something where people know it's Christmas. Just like I experienced when I was a child, having that little extra something to look forward to every year. That, for me, has always made a good railway-related Christmas. And, I just hope that translates to other people.
So there we have it. Sometimes a good Christmas really is about that little extra something special. Anthony Dawson's latest book might appeal to those fans of the channel who enjoy their Scottish railway history. Covering, among other things, Scotland's pioneering Cockenzie Wagonway, Early Railways of Scotland is available for purchase from Amazon, as well as the 1722 Wagonways website. So too is Chris Eden Green's latest DVD covering the Festiniog Railways fleet, as well as the ubiquitous Quarry Hunslets. Available from his website or YouTube memberships. Blu-ray options also available. Hashtag not sponsored, by the way. I'm just trying to help out my fellow creators, all of whom I greatly respect and all of whom can be found in the description. All that's left for me to say is, though it's been said many times, many ways, well, we all know how that one ends. Don't you?